skills. She comes to Tresata from Discovery Place. Charlotte, I'll let you speak. You do a better job than I do on this, obviously.
Hello, my name is Charlotte Fields. I work very closely with Pat on all things recruiting and human resources at Tresata. I'm new to Tresata's team. I came from Discovery Place where I ran museum experiences. I don't know if any of you've been there, but love STEM. My background's in molecular cell bio and chemistry, so always excited to see other females doing technical or STEM-based work. So I'm here to help answer any questions and get you guys best prepared for your technical interviews and potentially some work at Tresata.
Awesome. Thanks, Charlotte. Next, why don't we launch into the actual conversation in the workshop. Please, whenever you have a question as we go through the material, please please unmute and ask that question. Sometimes I get on a roll, and it's actually better if you interrupt me, because it's good to have more than one person just talking on this on the call. I also want to mention that this is, the focus of this call is helping you all prepare for tech interviews or technical interviews. And I'm guessing that we have a range of technical skills represented on this call. Some probably some, I think I recognize the name of a couple of people who've already applied at Tresata. And so I know we have some people on the call that have a pretty extensive tech background, but I'm guessing we probably also have some people who may not have as extensive a tech background, and that's totally okay too. We're really, at Davidson, there's a wide variety of people who are interested in going into tech from a wide variety of backgrounds. You think computer science, mathematics, maybe physics, but there's also English majors who know how to write and want to bring a technical approach to what they're doing, and biology, economics, political science, even. There are a lot of ways to get into the tech industry. So I just want to encourage you all, if you don't have some of the technical skills that you may hear us talk about today, that's okay. Just keep on doing what you're doing and building up some of those technical skills that we talk about, and you will make it happen. I'm fully confident of that. Okay, the next thing I want to do is share my screen, and what I thought I would do is basically go through two sort of mini PowerPoint presentations. The first one is about doing technical interviews, and I have some tips and such about that. And then the second part is going to be a sort of a brief version or abbreviated version of the presentation I do about Tresata, because I think that's a good way to illustrate some of the specifics that we talk about in technical interviews overall. So if you'll bear with me 1 second, I'm going to share my screen, and we'll get into it. All right, can you all see this? Okay, I see several people nodding your head, so I'll take that as a yes. Okay, oops, let's move forward on the slide. So first of all, as I mentioned, we can talk some about technical interview tips. And there's several things I want to talk about here. First of all are the different types of interviews we can have. Some of you have probably already done some of these interviews. One of the most common is when you have an interview about a specific technology or specific type of app. You can talk about Angular, you can talk about Chef, which allows you to automate a series of workflows. Most of the time when you move into these kinds of interviews, you will have some experience in this area. If someone is looking for an expert in SQL, they will look for people, they will bring in for interviews people who actually have some SQL background. So those tend to be more specialized. Another type of interview or question that you're going to run into are more general questions talking about computer science concepts and computer science fundamentals. These are less focused on making sure you understand a particular technique or language, and focused more on evaluating your overall problem-solving capabilities. There may be a question about describing optimal solutions or recursion, dynamic programming, some of those types of things. And if you haven't taken the computer science course or courses, then these are going to be harder interviews for you to do. But you can actually figure out a fair amount of information about some of these concepts online, just to give you some familiarity with them. Another type of technical interview is where they actually ask to look at your own work, to go through your actual code. They will ask you to bring in an example, or even better, they will give you some code and have you evaluate it, have you review it, and just talk about things like, what are the assumptions about the environment that this code has to run into? And can you imagine use cases or situations where the code doesn't work? What is the documentation like? What are the tests that you might run on this particular type of code? And for people from computer science backgrounds or more programming backgrounds, these kinds of things are going to be more useful. You can also, if you don't have that type of background, you can also pick up a lot of skills through online courses. All these concepts you can find out, you can understand through courses at edX, Coursera, and then there's a lot of kinds of sources of information for these concepts. Then the last types of interviews you may run into is, it may not even be assigned to a particular type of programming language. Your interviewer may just ask you to solve a particular problem. They're going to give you a question that you may not even heard of, and they want to see you struggle with it. And you may not have any idea how to answer it, but that's part of the challenge. They want to understand your thought process. They want to see you struggle with something unfamiliar where you probably don't know the answer off the top, but they want to understand how you think, what are the tools and sort of routines you use to address really difficult problems, and then how do you apply those tools? All those things can help them understand the way you think and your abilities, and whether or not you'll be a good match for their organization. So these are some broad categories of the types of technical interviews you may run into. The next thing I want to do is talk a bit about sample questions. And there are a whole slew of questions that you can find in these different categories. You're going to see that these two categories are pretty broad, and they can actually run in blur amongst each other. Among the behavioral and situational questions, one of the things that we oftentimes ask at Tresata is, how do you manage version control? When you're working on a team about code, and this actually not even just code, it has to, when you're working on a PowerPoint together or a paper together, how do you manage different people editing and making changes to that document or the code at the same time? What's your process for that? A good solution, if you've had some experience in this area, particularly code-wise, is GitHub. I think there's some classes at Davidson that encourage you to develop some expertise in GitHub. At Tresata and a lot of other tech companies, GitHub is a crucial tool in our toolkit that enables us to really manage version control incredibly effectively. If you're not familiar with GitHub, I encourage you to try to do some digging on it and understand how it works, because it's a really effective tool for version control. Another question that they may ask is about a recent project you worked on. What were your responsibilities? How did the project turn out, and why? Basically, sort of a debrief on that project. You're going to be, even if it's a group project, that's fine to talk about. They want to know what your responsibilities are and how you think about projects overall, and sort of your big picture. Because in a lot of these companies, a lot of these tech companies, you aren't going to be doing sort of minor stuff in isolation. You're going to have a project, and you're going to be working on that project. Even if it's building out a particular part of code, you're going to be working on the project with other people. They're going to be evaluating your code. You may be evaluating their code and their work. So they really want to understand how you organize a project, particularly around coding and creating apps and other kinds of things like that. And documentation is really important. How you work with other people in terms of assigning your responsibilities. All those things in terms of working in teams in a tech or coding environment are really important. Let's see, another question that I found that I think is relevant is a situational problem. And I think everybody on this call probably has done some work in Excel. So this is a question I found online this afternoon. You've just learned that a new client relies heavily on Excel and Access for data management analysis. What are the risks in this approach, and what would you do to mitigate those risks? So that requires you to have some understanding of at least Excel. I think everybody probably at some point has done some work in Excel, and then to think about a generic client who relies on Excel for their data management, their organization, their analysis. What are the risks there? I mean, what are the problems you can run into, and what would you do to try to reduce those risks? That's a really good problem that gets you thinking more than how you're going to do coding. It gets you thinking about the strengths and weaknesses of a particular platform and how you can reduce the risk in using that particular platform. We actually have used, I've heard this used in several different interviews at Tresata, where they don't ask about Excel, they ask about other programs, but it's really the same kind of question, where you have to understand a particular platform or tool and understand how you can reduce the risk in using that particular tool. All right, moving on to technical tools and skills. These are some more specific and direct questions. One of the ones I like the most is one that our Chief Product Officer would use in every introductory interview for I guess this was for a product development position. How would you program a Fibonacci sequence? You can use any language you want, but explain to me how you would program for it. A Fibonacci sequence is a sequence of numbers where each number is in addition to the addition of the previous two numbers. So it goes 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, and so and so. How would you write that in a program? And that's a really interesting question, because you don't have to know any particular language. You can use any language. It's the most concise and elegant and efficient way for writing out that particular sequence in computer code. Another common question that people are going to ask you is about your technical certifications. What are those certifications, and can you give an example of each of the languages that you mention in your cover letter or on your resume? So just be careful about the languages you mention and the skills that you mention. The ones that you do mention, make sure that you're ready to provide an example of how you've actually used that language. Because if you just say that you have some proficiency in Python, that's okay. But it's much more effective if you can talk about a specific problem or challenge, even in a course, that you use Python or R or SAS or whatever it is to try to address, because they're going to be really interested in understanding how you actually use that language in an applied problem. Another more challenging type of question is when they're going to ask you about a specific concept in programming or statistics that you may have used. Have you ever used clustering? Have you ever used HDFS? Have you ever used recursive programming? And these questions are more complicated because you really need some familiarity with those questions and with the concepts to really answer it well. And the key thing to remember here is not to get flustered if they say some things that you've never heard of. They're trying to push you, and they're really trying to see, one, the extent of your knowledge. But if they don't ask you things that you've never heard of, they're not going to know the extent of your knowledge. They're just going to think, oh, they knew up to this point. So they're really pushing beyond what the normal candidate's knowledge is. And another thing they're looking at is how you respond to a situation where you don't know the answer. Because that comes up all the time. Oh my gosh, the number of things that I run into where I have no idea about the answer, it happens almost every day. And one of the key things is, what do you do in that situation? Do you try to make up an answer based on limited or no knowledge? Or do you say, I don't know, but I can find out about that answer? And in an interview, the best thing to say is, I don't know, but that sounds like an interesting answer, interesting concept. Could you tell me some more about it? And then you might be able to take that answer and turn that into a more applied application. But if you don't know anything about what the interviewer is asking, don't say that you do know. Just say, well, that I don't know the answer. I don't know that concept. Or I haven't had any familiarity with that concept. Because again, they're trying to push the extent of your knowledge. And if you try to go beyond where your knowledge actually is, it's going to actually have a negative effect rather than a positive effect on your chances. Another question that we're asking right now at Tresata for our machine learning engineer position, which is probably going to be filled by somebody with a master's degree, so it's not really relevant for you all. And that question is, what was your favorite machine learning project? How did you design it? And in retrospect, how would you improve it now? So that's asking you to take a concept or tool like machine learning, give an example of it, talk about how you designed it and in terms of the underlying basis of it, what your models were set up, what kind of data you used, how you organized that data. And then in retrospect, how would you improve it based on what came out of your analysis? That's another, I think, really effective answer for trying to really get at how somebody thinks about a particular technique and actually applies it in some of their own work. All right, why don't we take a break there? And I want to see, I'd love to see if you all have any questions about any of the things I've talked about so far. I have a lot more content to cover, but I also want to try to break up my presentation into sort of a different way of us interacting in the middle of the presentation. So any questions about any of the things I talked about in terms of tips and types of interviews, sample questions, those kinds of things?
I don't know if this is something that you might cover later on in the interview, but I figured I may as well ask now.
Yep.
So as someone who's never done a technical interview before, I would imagine if I were in the situation right now, I would be sort of not necessarily afraid, but I would be less inclined to ask my interviewer questions. Like if I'm going through like a coding interview, I might want to, I mean, I might be more inclined to try to figure everything out myself as opposed to asking questions because I'm not sure how that might reflect on, you know, their perception of my ability. So how might an interviewer like see asking questions? How might they think about that? Or will they really not at all?
Type of question that you're asking. Because if you're asking questions that will clarify the specific answer you use, like if it's you're trying to figure out the best solution to a particular business use case, and the question doesn't specify, like in a distributed processing framework, the number of nodes that you can use, or the amount of space you can use, or the speed of the nodes, all those kinds of underlying assumptions. Depending on those underlying assumptions, you can go one path or another path in terms of trying to integrate the data and solve them. Those kinds of questions where you're asking about fundamental aspects of the problem that are going to shape your answer, I think those kinds of questions can be useful to show that you have a deeper level of understanding of the problem than somebody who's just trying to crank it out on their own. The kinds of questions I think that would be less productive for you is if you are trying to understand how you actually apply a particular technique and basic programming techniques. And you may run into a situation where you can get a problem, you can solve a problem halfway or get it sort of partway to the solution. If that ends up being the case, do as much as you can based on your existing knowledge and your existing abilities. But then when you explain their answer, you can say, well, this is how I know to up to this point. And then for the last part, if you have any insights about, even on a high level, how you sort of imaginatively, how you might programming, what the flow of the code might be, you can describe that, and either you ran out of time or you're not sure about that part of the program. Being open about the extent of your abilities, I think, is actually a really good situation, because you don't want to get into a job where the expectations of that job are well beyond your abilities. The key thing in all these interviews is to find the best match. The company's trying to find the best person. Daniel, are you the best match for Tresata? And you want to find the same thing on your end. And sometimes it's easy to lose track of that. Like if you don't get an interview or you don't get the position, it's understandable to be disappointed. But you got to think about it in terms of you're trying to find the place with the best match. So in terms of these questions, trying to be accurate and open about sort of your knowledge and the extent of that knowledge. You want to present it in a positive way, but you really don't want to exaggerate it, because that may lead you to a situation where it's not a good match between your extent of ability, your level of abilities, and what they're looking for.
Pat, can I chime in?
Please.
And the other thing is, as HR team members or as individuals who are doing recruiting, we read your resumes. We're well aware that you may not have the experience, and that's okay. But if you are overcompensating, that will manifest itself, and that actually doesn't look well. It actually can work against you. So most individuals would rather you say, I don't know, or ask, than to try to overcompensate for something you don't know.
Yeah, very much so. Another question. Any other questions? All right, well, I'm going to hop back into my presentation. I got a little bit more to talk about in terms of technical interviews, and I'll talk briefly about Tresata. Okay, sharing my screen again. All right, next up is the hiring process. I wanted to give you an idea of what the hiring process is at Tresata, the different steps, and then I'll talk about it, how it compares to other companies that I've heard about. And the first step on the left is to apply. Then we screen your resumes. And based on people's resumes and their cover letters, we decide on which candidates move forward to a phone screen. Which is really a 15 to 20-minute conversation, gauging your interest and knowledge of Tresata, and some information about your work in data and tech, and then some basic HR questions, and then an opportunity for you to ask questions of us. It's really straightforward conversation. For the people who make it through that stage, the next step is an online aptitude evaluation. That it's just a company, I think from England, that we use their online assessment, and that's really to give us an idea of sort of your strengths in a number of different areas, sort of personality wise and sort of analytically from that standpoint. The next step after that is a team interview, where you'll have probably a 30 to 45-minute conversation with a couple members of the Tresata staff. This gets into more detail, particularly for the data engineer interviews. This gets into more detail about your skills. Some of that, sometimes there are hypothetical case examples that we ask you to work through. And both people on the interview end up writing up their separate evaluation of each candidate. The next step, the penultimate step, is an interview with a member of our leadership. That's 4 or 5 people who have been at Tresata, most of them from the very beginning. And they take this whole recruitment process very seriously, and that's why they participate in the interview process. And then the final step of our process is an interview with our CEO, Abhi Mehta. And he takes very seriously, not more, but as much as anybody else, the importance of getting the right people to come to Tresata. He often uses the example of Google, where the 2 founding members of Google interviewed every person Google hired up until Google had 1,000 people working for them. And now it's hundreds of thousands of people. There's no way they can do that. But they thought it was really important to try to help maintain the important parts of the Google culture as long as they could in terms of the people that they brought in. Now, I think when you compare this process to other tech companies, Tresata likes to have you talk with a lot of people. There are a lot of different conversations, but one of the most important things that a company can do, and this is particularly the case with Tresata, is hire the right people. Figure out the best match, because we spend a lot of time and effort doing the interviewing and then doing the training. It's hugely important. It takes a lot of time. And for people that we bring on board, we want to make sure that they're exactly the right fit, exactly the right match. So that's why we have a lot of these phases. Other companies, they do it differently. You'll have 2, maybe 3, sometimes 4 of these steps. It really depends on the particular company and how much how much time and effort they want to devote to the interview process. All right, the last point I want to mention is some additional tips for preparing for these technical interviews. First of all, for your resume, on that front, you want to make sure you talk about some of the projects you've worked on, and particularly in the tech field. I'm sure Lindsay and her colleagues can give you good advice on this. Make sure you mention the languages and the tools that you're familiar with, because one of the things we're seeing in more and more companies is automated evaluations of resumes. At Tresata, we haven't done that yet, but 2 years ago, we had 1,000 applicants over the year for our last year, we had 2,000 applicants. At the pace we're going on this year, we're probably gonna, I don't know if we'll double it again, but we're gonna have a lot more this year. And going through the resumes, all those resumes is a real challenge. It takes a lot of time and energy. So if there is automated evaluation of resumes, you really want to make sure that you hit in your resume or cover letter the specific things that are described in the job description or the job ad, because those are the things that they're going to be searching for in the automated evaluation of the resumes. The second thing I want to mention is the cover letter. For some companies, this is a pro forma step. At Tresata, it's anything but. It's really, really important. I was just talking with this afternoon with Alex Feliciano, who is the head of our delivery team, and we were talking about some of the resumes that he's already been evaluating for the data engineers. And we get a lot of people who in LinkedIn or in Handshake, they see the data engineer job and they just click, I want to apply for it. The resume comes to us automatically. And that shows no genuine interest in Tresata. You contrast that with an applicant who writes a detailed cover letter where they talk about their knowledge of Tresata and they show how they can fit in, or they have some experience in some of the things that Tresata does. That's the kind of cover letter we're looking for, because the cover letter is really important for showing us how well you communicate. You may think that the writing course you had to take your first year was a complete pain. And it may have been, I don't know all those courses, but at the same time, it teaches you some really, really important skills. And the ability to write clearly is one of the most important skills you can have. And that's the kind of thing that we look for in your cover letters. It's really, really important. Another thing is to do your best not to get defensive. Sometimes when people get a question that's really challenging, applicants get a challenging question, they attack the question as being unfair. How dare you ask that? And of course, nobody could understand it. That's not the best answer, as you can imagine. You want to take the question in stride and realize that they're pushing to see how you react to being pushed. And if you say instead, oh, that's a really fascinating and interesting question, I haven't never thought about that, and then sort of talk some about how you might try to answer if you don't have the precise answer, that's a much better reaction to a situation where you're presented with an unknown challenge. Number 4 here, some I've already talked about. If you don't know the answer, say so. Again, making up answers and trying to put the best spin on basically no knowledge it's going to come out, and people will be able to tell that pretty clearly. Another thing is just I know we're I'm going to combine the next two together. I know we're in a virtual world and all our interviews are taking place like this. So from that standpoint, it's a little different than walking into a room, but it's still really important to overdress. You always want to be dressed up more than the people interviewing you, because it sends a really positive signal to the interview that you're taking the interaction seriously. You know they're devoting their time to talking with you, and you value and appreciate that. Another part of the virtual environment is making sure you pay careful attention to where you're doing it. I see a couple people on the screen right now, and their background looks great. You know, it's in your room, and you can see the walls of the room or whatever. Sometimes we've had interviews. I remember one memorable interview. A guy did it sitting in his bed, and the bed, he was basically in a ragged t-shirt, and his cat kept on walking around him, and he kept on petting a cat and interrupting the interview to try to take care of the cat. It was the weirdest thing, I tell you. Take the interview seriously and put yourself in an environment where you're conveying how seriously you take the interview. And yes, these intangibles, the body language, the background, the lighting, all these things have an influence about how somebody perceives you in a virtual environment. So it's really, really important, because you want to put your best foot forward. The final point I want to mention here in terms of tips is, if you can, try to follow up with the people who interviewed you. After the interview, try to send them just a brief email saying, thank you for taking your time. I really enjoyed talking with you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you talk about specific topics or things in the interview, mention those topics in your follow-up. That sends a really positive signal to whoever you're talking to that, again, you took the interview seriously and you want to build a relationship with that particular person. It's so incredibly important. The people that we get the follow-ups from, it doesn't determine if you go forward or not, but it's a hugely positive signal. And I think about the people that currently work at Tresata, a lot of them in the interview process sent those follow-ups. It's a really positive signal to the people that are interviewing you. All right, those are the things that I wanted to go through in terms of the technical interview. The next thing I want to do is do a brief version of Tresata's info session. And we'll come back to questions, I guess, at the very end of the process, because I want to make sure that I leave plenty of time for you all to talk. This is going to be a very abbreviated version of what Tresata does. Tresata's main mission and main vision comes out of these two words: enrich life. It's important to everything we do, to choosing our clients, choosing our use cases, helping our employees thrive in their work, being involved in community. We want to help everyone we're involved with enrich life. It's core to the company. We're not building software just for the sake of building software. We are trying to help people live more fulfilling lives. And what I want to do briefly is talk with you about a couple ways that we do that. One of the core things behind this idea of enriching life is actually using data to do that. In data lies the power to enrich life. This is a big part of what we do with all our clients. We help them use their data to provide better service and better support to our clients' customers. We can help them operate more effectively, more quickly, more secure, more conveniently. All these things, all these ways we try to help our clients help their customers have a more enriched life. And another way to think about this is to contrast the kinds of work that we do with what we like to call data takers. You think about the Googles and Amazons of the world. They love to capture our data from moving all around the World Wide Web. And that's the basis of their business model. That's what their advertising, that's what their sales is based on. They use other people's data to make money. We like to help our client companies become data makers, to actually use their data more effectively to support and provide services and products to their clients. The way our business model works, we take our software and our clients we install our software on our clients' systems behind their firewalls. We never own or possess any of the client's data. The client owns the inputs. Those data inputs go into our software. The client owns the outputs. They own the results of all our data analysis. And we think that makes for a very different business model in terms of making sure that we're not focusing on our clients' data, we're focusing on our clients' business opportunities and trying to help our clients make the most of those particular business opportunities. Another crucial part of what we do is automation and using AI. Let me break these two things apart. I'm guessing that everybody on this call has done some work in data in some form or another. Creating your own data set, doing some analysis, doing much more complicated things. You know that process can be pretty tedious. From cleansing the data to reorganizing, to merging, to enriching, all that goes into actually trying to produce the data you're going to do the analysis with. That whole process takes a huge amount of time, and it gets more complicated with the more diverse and more numerous data sets you're trying to integrate into your final analysis. We think that process consumes way too much time for a lot of people. So what we try to do is automate it. Our software is based on automation. First of all, we build out the workflows that are necessary to integrate and clean and enrich all these different data sets for our clients. Then we automate that whole process. So once we press the button to start our software, the whole process is automated. So the data automatically comes into our software, and automatically at the other end comes the dashboards, comes the apps, comes all the analytical insights that come from the different kinds of models we set up for our clients. We also use machine learning and AI throughout this whole process. You all probably have done maybe some machine learning in some of the CS classes at Davidson, where you get the data set and you actually generate predictions from that data set. That's really important, and we do that in a variety of contexts. But we also use machine learning earlier in that process. We use machine learning throughout the data analytics pipeline. We use ML to identify types of variables in data sets. You might think you could do this you could do it by hand for maybe a 300 variable, a 300 column data set. But imagine if you have 3,000 of those 300 column data sets. There's no way you can do that, yet that's what our clients have. So we use machine learning to automatically identify the types of variables. It's not perfect, but we come up with really good predictions about each type of variable. That's the type of way that we use machine learning throughout this process so that we can have the models do the heavy lifting, and that whole process is automated, saving our clients time for doing more interesting and important stuff for their clients. So our verticals, you can see them on the screen here: health, money, and things. And I'll just give you a couple examples. In health, we spend a lot of time working with healthcare systems, but one of our biggest clients is I think the second or third largest medical device manufacturer in the world. And we help them use the data from their devices. One of the most common examples is they produce a device that allows people with diabetes to measure their blood sugar on a daily, sometimes many times a day basis. Our software integrates all that data from the millions of their customers measured multiple times every day. That's a really challenging data question to try to integrate all those different data streams. But the goal here, and in fact, this is what we're working on right now, is to help the company use their data to help people with diabetes manage their blood sugar more effectively. Think about all that data that you can use to leverage from an analytical standpoint to help people reduce the impact of their diabetes. Another really important example is in money. We have a number of banks who are some of our biggest clients. One of the biggest challenges facing banks right now is money laundering. So many of transactions, financial transactions are taking place online and are taking place globally. And it's very difficult for a bank to know where money actually is originated, because a bank in London may get a transfer from a bank in Paris, but the bank in London doesn't know where that money came from before Paris. It could come from Cyprus and Italy and Ukraine, and originally come from Russia, and some of the mob money from Russia that's being money laundered. Banks traditionally have tracked this individually, i.e. they have a person like you or me looking up where the details of each transaction. Tresata has a really powerful networking product that allows us to automate that entire research process. So a research challenge that would take a person several hours, we can do in several minutes. It saves the banks huge amounts of time, and given that the banks are paying literally billions of dollars in fines globally for money laundering problems, this is a huge opportunity for Tresata in terms of really trying to help banks reduce this impact of money laundering. So that's another area where, again, Tresata is being very selective in trying to choose the projects we work on to actually try to provide assistance to the banks, but also reduce this problem of money laundering that really is a challenge for every country in the world. What are we looking for at Tresata in terms of the people we'd like to hire? We're looking for a hunger to learn, a hunger to really try to every day tackle something new. And this happens on a daily basis with everybody in our organization, from the CEO down to new data engineers. We're also looking for people who have an extra edge, an extra hustle. And that's because the data analytics business in the global economy is going to be worth $3 trillion. That's a lot of money. And so there are a lot of companies who really want to get into this space and take a share of that $3 trillion. That's why Tresata has to have this extra edge and extra hustle. Right now, we're right at the cutting edge of data analytics in this space. But to maintain that edge, we have to work extra hard. We have to have this extra edge. But in spite of all that, we're always going to find somebody out there who does something better than us. You all know this situation, particularly at Davidson, where everybody has a 4.0 average in high school and a student body president and does all these kinds of things that are absolutely amazing. You always find somebody that's better in something at you, better at something than you are. And that's part of life. That's the challenge that Tresata faces. There are always people out there, companies out there that are better than we are in some individual things. But for us, that gives us a lot of humility, but it also feeds back into the hunger and hustle and motivates and inspires us to work even harder to do better in our products and in our work with our clients. All right, your path at Tresata. This can take a variety of ways, variety of paths. We have more of a career jungle gym than a career ladder. But regardless of what you do, you're going to be working in a hot field where data analytics really is the start of a 30 or 40 year revolution in transforming how US and global businesses use data to impact and improve their operations. That's what you're getting into. For everybody that starts at Tresata, you enroll in a 3-month training in our Tresata Academy. And this gives you the basic skills for becoming understanding how our products work, how all our different products can help our clients. We train you in the basic languages you need to know, and then we show you how to use our products. Another really attractive option of working at Tresata is the opportunity to see the world. Right now, we have offices in London and Delhi, and one of our greatest needs is having people who are interested in working in London. It's a huge career opportunity because the clients we have in London They are, the projects we're working on for them are hugely fascinating. We need people over there to actually step in to do that. So if you have any interest in working in London for a year or two, or maybe longer, Tresata can provide some really great opportunities for you. And the final point I want to make about this is going back to that core idea of enriching life. All these things are oriented around clients and use cases for those clients that have a positive impact for our clients and for our clients' customers. So one of the reasons that I found Tresata so attractive after working at Davidson for such a long period of time is it really is a mission, vision-driven company. And we don't take every client that comes to us, we take a fraction of the clients that come to us. We really focus on the clients that are the best match with what Tresata and our vision are trying to move forward on out in the world and also inside the company. All right, I think there may be one more slide here. These are our basic values that I think it's important to keep in mind. Learning to love and loving to learn. We try new things every day. We're building new things every day. In the data analytics world, there's so many things that you can build. Every one of you can build something new in data analytics that could help companies out there do a better job of using their data. In terms of being bold, we really embrace risk-taking, and we really encourage people to do that, even if the risk doesn't turn out. If you never take any risk, you never push yourself as far as you might push yourself. And Tresata, if you make a mistake, you try and things just don't work, that's okay. Some of our best ideas have come from people taking risk and the risk not working. But what we learned from taking that risk led to a new idea that actually turned out to be really productive. That's the kind of mindset you have at Tresata. And that is a really quick overview of Tresata. I apologize for running through it so quickly, but I also wanted to make sure that you all have time to talk with me and Charla about whatever questions you might have about Tresata, technical interviews, or anything under the sun. So I'm going to open the floor to you all.
Do you know off the top of your head any resources that would be helpful to prepare for technical interviews?
I would say a couple of things, and Charlotte, you may have some ideas on this too. If you go online, you can find tons and tons of questions about technical interviews and tips like that. So that's sort of the easy answer. The harder answer is trying to guess what the technical interview is going to look like at the company you're interviewing with. And for that, my suggestion is to do research on the company. That research is going to help you when you actually get in to talk to them, because you're going to know sort of what they do and the kinds of products they work on. But in that research, that should give you some idea about the kind of work they do. Is it a SaaS-based company, or do they use Python for text analysis, or whatever it is they do? That's going to give you some idea, and then that, I think, will give you a better idea of what kinds of specific skills you need to bone up on, or whether or not even that company is a good match for you. Because if you're a total computer programmer and the company really wants somebody to do statistical analysis of big data sets, I mean, you can learn how to do that. There's no question about that. But that's, that goes back to that point I made earlier about you want to figure out the companies that are best matched for you, the kinds of skills you have, the kinds of interests you have, and sort of the kind of work you want to do going forward, because there's so many different types of things out there, and there's so many companies out there that need help with a wide variety of things. Charlie, anything to add on that, or?
The other thing I was thinking is a lot of companies are interviewing for cultural fit. And so you want to make sure that you are also interviewing the company. So if there are technical questions that, again, you don't know, many times in many cases, recruiters are okay with that, because we can teach you technical skills, but we can't teach you to be a cultural fit.
It's a really important point. Thanks, Daniel.
I have a question specifically about machine learning. So as a recent graduate, how much would you actually get to impact machine learning decisions or work in machine learning?
At Tresata, or
yes,
at Tresata? Sure. It's interesting. We had last week I had a conversation with several data engineers about this, and one of the data engineers, Preksha, was she works for one of our banking clients, And one of the biggest challenges for that particular banking client, we started working with them with their US branch, and they so like what we did. They have employed us for their global company. So we're integrating multiple branches. So Preksha has been spending a ton of time trying to integrate different data streams. And from that standpoint, she does less machine learning and more trying to sort of build out the workflow to integrate all those different data streams into a usable data asset. So that's one example. But our data engineers, the work they do really varies depending on the client. We have another set of data engineers who are working for a printing company, a national printing company. And what the company does, they supply other companies with printer cartridges. Sounds like a pretty mundane thing, but one of their biggest challenges is they never know when to send replacement cartridges. The company never each subscribing company never gives them a good idea of that, so they have to guess themselves. And so these two data engineers who just started, they started a year ago this past July. They finished Tresata Academy training in September or October, and then they started working on this particular project. And one of the first steps was trying to integrate the data. But in this context, they only had to do this for a couple companies. But then their next task, what they started working on in January, was building out a machine learning model for how you can predict when a printer cartridge is going to run out. And you'd think this was, again, not the most profound thing, but it was fascinating actually getting into the details of it. And the company is totally blown away by it. They did a presentation, the CEO, and he said, "This is all the stuff I've been worried about for such a long time, but I had no evidence to back it up." And that's where the work they did came in really handy. So these are a couple women who were at Tresata for 6 to 8 months, and I think in the 7th month, that's when they, with some senior engineers, made the presentation to the CEO. So our data engineers do a wide variety of things. Sometimes you hear about data scientists and data engineers, and data engineers are the ones doing the data sort of the dirty work around the data, and the data scientists are doing all the predictions and everything. Be careful to clarify what those terms mean at each company. We don't have data scientists at our company. We have data engineers, and the data engineers do a wide variety of things. We have a couple really high-level machine learning engineers, and they help people develop the machine learning models, but that's a great way to learn how to build more effective models. So in terms of working at Tresata, it really depends on the client needs in terms of how much our data engineers are doing one type of thing versus another type of thing. Thanks for your question.
Another question.
Yes.
So I know you talked a bit about Tresata Health and Tresata Money, and gave some details on both of those, but could you talk a little bit about the last category, Tresata Things, and what that means?
Sure.
What that is.
That's more of a grab bag bucket than anything else. One of our earliest clients was Harris Teeter. Most of you have a Vic card, maybe. You may also use the Harris Teeter app. If you use the Harris Teeter app, every week you get recommendations on things to buy, coupons potentially, all those kinds of things come every week. And I think there are probably 4 or 5 million people across the US who participate in that and get these weekly predictions on their app. We help set up Harris Teeter's original models and data streams to produce all those predictions. So that's one example, customer loyalty programs. Probably the other big example is one of our clients is one of the 2nd or 3rd largest airline in the world. Okay, so this falls more into transportation. And what we have done is, with that particular client, we've helped them integrate data streams about all their passengers. And you think about whenever you fly, there are a lot of pieces of data that can go into that. Your reservation data, your frequent flyer data, any social media you post, you provide on how horrible the service was or how quick it was, whatever it is, and that's still attributed to you. And imagine if you have a problem with your flight and you go to the airline's customer service desk in the airport, and the particular airline employee gets your name and pulls up your information. Wouldn't it be better if they had all that information at their fingertips to help you? Because if you were a platinum gold traveler, the airline would want to do everything they could to make you happy. But if you have a history of just ridiculous complaints, or you've only flown in the airline one time, the airline's probably not gonna, they'll be nice to you, but they aren't gonna pull out all the stops and roll out a red carpet. It's that type of personalized customer service that the airline wants to provide. And that's what we're trying to work on with the airline. To be totally transparent, that work is not moving forward super fast right now because none of the airlines are in particularly great shape right now. Just, the bottom's fallen out of that whole market. And they're just struggling to stay alive. But I think once they get back on their feet, we actually, this is a big part of Tresata, trying to maintain positive relationships with our clients. And we volunteered to continue to work with the airline for no charge as long as they need it to get back on their feet. But they decided to actually shut down the analytics division that we were working with, just because they didn't have enough money to pay the people in that division. So it was really unfortunate. But we still have a really good relationship with the airline. I expect that to pick back up once the airline industry gets back on its feet. So that gives you some idea of what the different opportunities are in the Tresata Things vertical. Other questions?
This is a question about interviews in general, but do you think this year a big thing employers are going to ask or be more interested in is how candidates would work in a remote environment, like ask questions about that, because I know a lot of internships for next summer and potentially jobs as well have already started talking about being remote.
Yeah, basically, you're asking how an internship or job could work remotely, and how much of a factor that is, Caitlin?
Yeah, and also like whether employers would be talking to candidates about that and trying to gauge like how well they would work in a remote setting.
I think that is in terms of gauging how well candidates would work in a remote setting. I think that is certainly a factor. Because that takes a level of motivation and engagement. And one of the biggest things at Tresata is over communication, because you don't have the informal interactions with people. So you do have to make an extra effort to make sure. Charlie and I talk so much. If we were in the office, we would just run into each other all the time, but we're not. So we have to make sure we don't let things slip through the cracks. And that's a really, really important thing. So I know that companies are very concerned about that. I think one of the biggest things is nobody really knows how long this particular period is going to last. You may have seen that JP Morgan, and probably a month ago, decided they're going to bring everybody back into their offices in New York City. And just last week, they started sending people home again because they're getting sick again with the virus. So that's the state of the world we live in. So yeah, I think this remote work thing is going to be part of our lives for maybe a fair amount of time. I don't know. And we have to be able to adapt to that. So it does take a very particular type of employee who can make that work effectively. Charlotte, do you want to add anything to this? Tresata is working remotely now, and Charlotte's been involved in trying to help us navigate that path pretty well.
Yeah, I think what you're asking is a great question, but as Pat has kind of alluded to, the priorities of the company vary by CEO. And so as he's shared, there are some companies that are already going back to the office, and there are others that have made long-term commitments to stay remote. So that's going to vary, I think, by company and who you're interviewing with. And also it's something to factor in for sure, but we're also keenly aware that you all are going to put your best foot forward on that interview. But what happens after you sign the dotted line may change. You might become a little bit more comfortable. And those are things we're aware of. So we just have to, as a company, empower our employees with what they need to be successful. And that sometimes includes coaching along the way, like make sure your bed is made up before you turn on your Zoom video. Or one of the things I have to think about is I have a dog, and making sure that she's not disrupting in certain settings. So we're aware of all of those pieces that inform the dynamic. So,
and Caitlin, you mentioned the internship programs. Last summer, we ran our internship program totally virtually, and we had two women in India, one guy, Demetrius, who's a senior at Davidson this year, he was in Greece, and another woman from Duke who was initially in Austria and spent the last 2 weeks in, I think, Hong Kong. So we had to navigate that, and I think we navigated it really well. We missed immensely the in-person interaction. Charlotte and I have been talking about that this week, about just there's something to be said for being in the same room with a group of people on a daily basis for a couple of weeks, because this was 8 weeks long, because you get to know people and you build these bonds that are hard. If you've never spent time with somebody in person, it's harder to build those bonds. And that is a really, really important thing for a lot of places, but particularly at Tresata, building up the social capital and understanding of where somebody's coming from. So that is a big concern of ours for our internship program going forward. Other questions?
I was wondering about specifically the data engineer role. Kind of what does that look like in terms of what percentage of your day spent coding, or whether that varies with like each person, whether some people work more with like presentations and like product, or how that varies.
No, that's another good question. We have several different teams at Tresata. We have the delivery team, and the delivery team is made up of data engineers who do a lot of the coding to implement our software on client systems. We also, part of the delivery teams are software delivery managers. Another way to think about this position is project managers. The SDMs, the software delivery managers, they manage the implementation projects. They make sure that we have clear deadlines. We have 2-week sprints with the agile method, and they keep track of that and push people to meet their deadlines. Another big part of the SDM role is managing the relationship with clients. And all the SDMs have really strong social skills that enable them to really manage that relationship well. So integrating the data engineers and the SDMs, really that creates a very effective client team. Separate from the delivery team is the product team. And the product team has a number of different parts. Part of it's developing new versions of our software and new iterations of our software. Another part of it is, this is a relatively new development with Tresata, but developing customer-facing apps, our own apps that we are releasing to people. One of the most recent ones is our Healthy app. If you go to Tresata's website, you can find some information about it. It's basically a way to evaluate, wherever you are in the US, how bad is the COVID virus in terms of getting worse, getting better? Is it a real threat compared to other areas? One of the biggest things with that particular app is using network analysis to evaluate the risk or the threat. A lot of the models out there treat each county as separate from the counties around it, which seems like a real problem. For you all up at Davidson, you may know that probably for the last 2 or 3 weeks, the COVID virus has been worse in the counties surrounding Mecklenburg County than actually in Mecklenburg County. And that's a real threat for people in Mecklenburg County, just because of people cross the lines back and forth. It's that type of analysis that Tresata can bring into the Healthy app that I think is innovative. But in terms of programming, we have people in all those areas do programming. The presentations, our sales and marketing team do a lot of presentations. Sometimes we pull in our data engineers on demos and basically competitions for other companies' business. They usually don't do a lot of the presentations, at least initially. We have some of the sales and marketing people do those presentations, but they're actively involved in doing sort of the groundwork for those presentations. Again, I want to go back to the idea of career jungle gym. We bring people in, we give them the technical training, and then we sort of figure out what's the best place for them given their interest and their skills and the needs of our clients. It's a sort of a complicated process, but there's more than enough work to do in all these different areas. So we're really trying to just, again, match each person to the best position for them. We're a couple minutes over time, but we can stay as long as you need to answer whatever questions you have.
Yeah, I do have another question. I was just going to ask you. You mentioned the agile process for the software development. Do you use any other process models, like iterative models or the waterfall model in development projects, or does it depend on what project it is?
Our preferred model is the Agile framework. Having said that, because I think the Agile framework is more effective in software development, and we're a software company. We're not a consulting company, we're a software company. Our clients license our software from us. Having said all that, we work with a wide range of clients who are organized in a wide variety of ways. And to use the simplest example, some of them really love to use they've been operating for years on the waterfall method, which is a very sort of linear method. You go down one waterfall and another waterfall, and that really guides the process. And it's not as flexible to changes and responsives to interest from people actually using the final product. And that becomes the tension between our Agile focus and the client's focus. And sometimes the clients, they love conceptually the idea of Agile, but they don't like letting their teams have the autonomy to build something out over 2 weeks. So that leads them to really, they say they're being Agile, but they're in actuality, they're really sort of more of a waterfall approach to it. So in that kind of situation, our software delivery managers really have to do a very careful job of trying to balance things to sort of bend the Agile framework to what is reality more of a waterfall method, which sort of defeats some of the benefits of the Agile framework. But we try to work as effectively as we can with whatever clients bring to us. And we prefer the Agile method. Our SDMs get training in it, and a number of our data engineers, I think, also get training just so they can be familiar with it. We use that internally on some projects, but we have to work over other clients and build as strong a relationship as we can with those clients. Any other questions?
Hi, Pat. I actually had a quick question if time allows. So I'm currently a junior, and I'm sure a lot of people on this call are as well. And first of all, thank you for this very informative session. I think we've all gleaned a lot from it. Second of all, I was wondering if you could give us a quick breakdown of the junior, I guess, internship timeline, what we're expected to do, maybe reaching out with applying and stuff like that. Is there a set timeline for this process, or is that something that's more arbitrarily or personally done?
That's a great question. Thanks for bringing it up. As you can see from our website, we have posted the intern application, and we're currently receiving the intern applications, actual candidates, and evaluating those candidates. In terms of a timeline, we are evaluating the candidates on a rolling basis and starting the interviews and that entire process. I expect us to follow a process somewhat similar to last year, where last year I would say many of our intern candidates we evaluated and chose the ones we wanted to come to join the program before the holidays, before Christmas. But we also brought in some people after Christmas. And I think we'll probably follow a similar process this year. I guess what that means for you all is you don't need to apply today or tomorrow, so that it's not that immediate. But I really would work on trying to get your application in, if you're interested, in the next week or two, so that you can be considered in that first pool of people that will be applying. And I think your chances of getting accepted, just say you're a typical candidate, not strong, not easy, just your typical candidate, your chances of getting accepted are higher if you apply sooner rather than later. Just because I expect us to have a pretty constant stream of applicants throughout the next several months, and we'll take the best candidates that come in initially, and then we'll gradually start filling up the slots that we have for the internship program. So, and that's in terms of the application timeline. And the internship will, it'll start next summer. Right now, it's looking like we'll try to do it virtually again. It's so hard to know exactly what that's going to look like, though, that I hesitate to say for sure that that's definitely going to be the case. But it's really looking like we're going to have a virtual program again, which again, I think it worked pretty well last summer. So, Charlotte, anything to add to that?
No, but I do want to say thank you all for your time.
Very much so. It's been great talking with you all, and thanks for the great questions and for you all taking the time today to talk with us about technical interviews. I hope the information was helpful. If you have questions, please email us. My email is pat@tresata.com. Lindsay has the email. Charla's email is charla.fields@tresata.com. So it's pretty straightforward. And but if you haven't written those down, Lindsay has both our email addresses on that front. So don't hesitate to get in touch if you have questions about the positions, about the application process, or anything related. I also want to wish you all the best of luck with the rest of the semester. This has to be one of the hardest semesters ever. Has nothing to do with you all, has all to do with the virus and all the challenges that's creating for higher ed and for you all as students. So my son is a junior in college right now, and so I'm seeing things a little bit from through his eyes too, and it's just hard. And I wish you all the best of luck in making the most of it, because Davidson's still a great place to get an education. So I'm really glad you all are there, very much so. All right, thank you all so much for your time again, and I hope you all have a great rest of the day, great evening, and I hope we see you all in our application process very soon. All right, thank you all. Have a great night. We'll see you.
Thanks, Pat. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Pat and
Thank
Charlotte,
you.
thank you both.
Thank you.